of the Environmental Quality Board, or EQB. My name is Nancy Daubenberger, and I'm the Commissioner of the Minnesota Department of Transportation and the EQB Chair. Pleased to have you all joining today. Another virtual meeting, but we're looking forward to getting together again, likely next month for the May meeting in person. But before we get started, I would like to take this opportunity and to announce, but also to welcome our new public member from Congressional District 3, Dan Katzenberger. The gentleman with a last name just as long as mine. I counted letters in the last name to check, and yep, we tie. But Dan, if before we get going on roll call, if you would like to share anything, take this moment to share anything about yourself, other than that you are from Congressional District 3. I understand you're from Eden Prairie, but anything you want to share at this moment, we'll pause and then we can get going with roll call.
Just quickly that I'm excited to be a member of EQB. I'm coming off of 6 years of being a commissioner on Eden Prairie Sustainability Commission. So I just rolled off of that in April, or at the beginning of April. So yeah, excited to be here and excited to meet everybody, both virtually and hopefully in person sometime. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Public Member Katzenberger. Yes, we look forward to meeting you in person as well. And thank you for your willingness to serve on the board. We'll appreciate your participation, your input, and your service to the QB. So now I am excited to turn it over to our rather new Executive Director, Catherine Neusler. She is going to take over with the roll call at this point. Catherine.
All right, thank you, Madam Chair. The official roll call at this point. Commissioner Arnold?
Commissioner Arnold?
I'm here.
I'm here.
Okay. Member Bakken?
Member Bakken?
Present.
And Member Bauerkemper?
Member Bauerkemper?
Hi, yes, I'm here. Thanks.
And I believe Commissioner Cunningham isn't here, so we have Assistant Commissioner Huff.
Good afternoon.
And Chair Daubenberger.
I'm here. Thank you.
Member Foster.
Here.
Member Hintz, I don't believe is here. I believe she's still on leave. Member Katzenberger.
Here.
Commissioner Kessler.
I am here.
And Member Konar Steenberg.
Present. Thank you.
Member Martin.
Yes, hi.
Do we have Acting Commissioner McKinnon? Don't believe, Member Nelson, I don't believe we were expecting him. Checking. Commissioner Peterson?
Here.
Commissioner Roberts Davis?
Here. Good afternoon, everyone.
I believe Commissioner Stroman is not with us today. Member Van Amberg? And I believe on behalf of Met Council, we have Susan Vento.
Present.
We have can't count that fast. I believe we do have sufficient voting members to have a quorum, Madam Chair. Not that we're planning to vote on anything much today.
That's wonderful. Thank you. Thank you for doing the roll call, Executive Director Neusler. All right, so then the next item on the agenda would be approval of the consent agenda, which would be the meeting minutes from the March 15th, 2023 EQB meeting. That is packet page number 4. And the preliminary agenda for today's April 19th, 2023 EQB meeting, which is packet page number 3. So at this point, is there a motion to approve the consent agenda?
Peter Bakken, I would make that motion.
Thank you, Public Member Bakken. Is there a second?
Chris Davis will second.
I will second.
Thank you. All right. Is there any discussion on the motion? Hearing none. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say nay. All right. Hearing no opposition, the motion carries and the consent agenda is adopted. So next we will go to the Executive Director's report. So I will turn it over to Executive Director Nuschler. Catherine, are you ready?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. I will note, it looks like Acting Commissioner McKinnon has been able to join us, missed him during roll call, so add that in. Thank you all. I'm very excited to be here for my first official board meeting, and hopefully we'll all run smoothly today. Just a couple of things. I have been working on scheduling one-on-one updates and just check-ins with all of you. I've had a few. It's been really great to connect and talk a little bit about what you want the EQB to be working on and how I can help you fulfill your roles. So I think I've emailed everybody. If I haven't, I'm pretty sure I have, but if I haven't connected with you yet, I will be reaching back out to just make sure we get something scheduled, because I would like to just have those introductory conversations. A brief update from the legislative session. As of last week, when we went through the final committee votes, the change item that the EQB had to do a climate calculator and the staffing to implement that was in both omnibus budget bills. So assuming that continues to go forward, we will have that work to add to our work plan for next fiscal year. And we'll be talking more about that, I'm sure, as we go through that. The other small update I wanted to give you all was about the Odyssey project, we're calling it, our IT improvement project, which I think you all heard about in January. It includes an EQB monitor submittal service that will replace the existing submission process, which is going to be used by the RGUs and their consultants and should provide a better system for producing the monitor. It's going to automate the process for providing the required and general notices. So that system is about to go into a soft launch. And during that period, the EQB staff will be moving over active projects. And Jesse will be reaching out to RGUs that have projects in process and asking essentially for their help as we move into the soft launch. But we're very excited for that IT project to be moving forward. It's something that's been on the books for a long time to get that done. In addition, and I think the more exciting part moving forward is that it's going to include tools that will make project information more centralized and easily available, ensuring access to current and historical environmental review documents that have been published. So there'll be a projects database webpage that includes a map and search results, and that includes history of individual projects displayed in this map format. It's going to help us also support better data collection about the types of reviews and projects that are occurring. So the monitors part is going to launch, soft launch pretty soon. It'll take a little bit longer for the database to kind of get populated and really be something that's interesting to look at. And we will come back and give you probably some overviews of that as it launches and is showing information in, I think, really cool and helpful ways. So again, Jesse's working on some communications to make sure that all of this rolls out smoothly to our RGUs and partners in the public. Also on IT things, we are, as the chair noted, planning to move to hybrid meetings at least in May and in hopefully the snow-free months. There'll be a room here at the MPCA building at 520 Lafayette, and the chair and I think, would be most happy to see any of you in person. For May, we will be on the first floor of the building. We are going to continue to have the option to join virtually, and we're exploring whether WebEx is the best platform for that or whether we might move to a Microsoft Teams webinar-based system. But we want to make sure whatever it is, it's easy to use and familiar to all of you. So just we'll let you know how that goes. The staff and I are going to be testing it out over the next couple of weeks to just see how it goes. But we thought for many of you, Teams might be a more familiar platform. and WebEx has been a little unstable, so we want to make sure we have the best possible experience for our hybrid meetings. And that is all I have, but I'm happy to take questions if that's appropriate.
Thank you, Director Nuschler. Does anyone have any questions for the Executive Director? If so, of course, you can raise your hand or just jump in too. I try to monitor hands raised in the participant list, but I might miss something. So if I'm not seeing your hand, again, please just jump in. All right. Well, I think we can then move on. I'm not seeing or hearing any questions. So the next item on the agenda is our Pollinator Action Framework update. And we have our EQB State Pollinator Coordinator, Rebecca Gutierrez Moreno, here to present to the board. So welcome, Rebecca. Go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm just waiting for okay, there you go with the slides. Thank you, Madam Chair and members of the board and the public. Good afternoon. So my name is Rebecca Gutierrez Moreno, and I am the State Pollinator Coordinator with the Environmental Quality Board. And here I am today representing the Interagency Pollinator Protection Team, IPPT for short. I'm going to be saying IPPT a lot. And just to give you an update on the progress toward developing the Minnesota Pollinator Action Framework. And the main objective of this presentation is to provide you with an opportunity to see our timeline and ask any clarifying questions you may have. Just give me 1 second here because my computer's telling me a lot of stuff that I don't want to know right now. Okay, so can we go to the next slide, please? Jesse, thank you. Since we have a new board member and a couple newer board members as well, I just want to provide a brief background for the Interagency Pollinator Work project. And so basically, since 2016, the first executive order, 1607, appointed the board as a convener of an interagency pollinator protection team to develop statewide pollinator protection goals and report on progress every year to the board. The subsequent administration provided continuity to this work with the 2019 executive order, which in addition to convening the IPPT, the EQB is also responsible of developing and implementing a civic engagement framework to ensure public participation in pollinator protection, pollinator-related policy and programs. In this timeline, you can see some of the main outcomes from interagency reports and from the work that we have been doing. So, for example, in the 2017 report, the interagency team, in collaboration with external partners and experts on subject matter experts, identified the goals that we want to pursue that to protect pollinators in the state. In 2018, we identified outputs. In 2019, the team developed metrics and scorecards to measure progress toward these goals. And in 2022, the interagency team considers that the next step to move action forward was to develop a framework to guide us to see where we have to prioritize resources, to see where policy may need to change, or to see what programs may need to be created. Next slide, please. So in 2022, the interagency team started working on the action framework. The purpose, again, for this framework is to guide strategic alignment of resources, policies, and programs to help Minnesota's pollinators. We also established a public engagement framework for this. We did a first round of public engagement last year through an engagement platform, but also directly reaching out to individuals and organizations that are working for pollinators in the state. And this year we implemented a second round of engagement that we just closed, and and I will show you a little bit of a timeline in a little bit. So this is just to remind you, the framework structure has goals, which is our overall overarching goals. And under them, we have categories, subcategories, and actions. And we are planning to release the final document by summer of 2023. Next slide, please. So here's a little bit of our current timeline. We released a draft of the Pollinator Action Framework on December of last year. And this year, as I mentioned, during the first months of the year, we implemented a second round of public engagement. This month, the interagency team is working on incorporating that feedback that we got from the public, from focus groups, from the engagement platform into the framework. And we are discussing that feedback, and we are connecting, that with the framework, because our next step for the months of May and June is to have workshops with state agency appointed leadership to work on the final document. So that I will be facilitating discussions with leadership to review this final draft and take their feedback in guidance to determine a final document. And at the same time, we're working on, we have an outline for what that report of this year is going to look like. It's going to be mainly the action framework. We are planning, from what we heard from the board last year, we're planning on including sections on climate change and pollinators, connecting pollinators with equity, and also including stories of action, so that the members of the public and the board can also see what other people are doing out there to help pollinators in the state. So we want to have a final narrative by July, and hopefully having what we're aiming to have the final document ready by the end of August, the end of the summer of this year. So right now, this is the update. This is what we're doing currently and what we're planning to do in the next couple months to finalize the draft. And I can take any questions you may have. Thank you.
All right, thank you so much, Rebecca. What questions might folks have for Rebecca on this at this point?
I don't have any questions. I just wanted to thank you for your work on this and for giving us these excellent updates over the last several meetings. I really appreciate the quality of the information we've been receiving. So thank you.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Yes, thank you. Any other questions or comments?
Madam Chair,
Yes, go ahead.
I just wanted to echo that comment. Since my participation with the EQB, I've really looked forward to hearing more from the team on this work, and see this as just one of the great things that EQB is doing in leading and consolidating the work that's being done statewide to protect our pollinators and their habitat. So thank you for this work.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dan.
Chair Dobbenberger, this is Katrina. I've tried to put my hand up. I don't know if you can see it. Just one question. Thanks to Rebecca and the team. Completely echo what you've heard others say. So this workshop that's happening in May, is it going to happen during the EQB meeting or a separate time?
It's separate time. So I'm connecting right now with the people appointed by the commissioners, that agreed to have a representative at this workshop, and this will be separate from the board meeting. So I'm planning to schedule 2 to 3 workshops, depending what we see on the progress on the second workshop, if we need a third one. But we plan to send the final draft that the IPPT has worked on after the public engagement part of it to them with at least 3 weeks in advance, so people can get familiar with the document. And also I'm recommending our team members, IPPT members, to reach out to and connect with their leadership so they can be properly briefed, and that they can, come ready to discuss what state agencies can do on this work. So these are going to be separate meetings, and I think they're going to be about 1.5 hours. So I'm dusting off my facilitation skills so that we can have some productive time together.
That's helpful. And so when you say leadership, it's leadership. Are you expecting the commissioners to come? I just want to know because the schedule of May is already very full, and want to make sure that we're making space for this important topic.
Of course, and actually, I already have the names that people have appointed.
Oh, okay.
I
Great.
was yeah, so it's not the commissioners directly unless they want to participate. They're more than welcome to come if they can find time in their agenda. But I've already, connected with the people you have appointed to start planning this and putting them on the calendars.
Good questions, Commissioner Kessler, and hopefully that answered your question. And I am glad to hear, Rebecca, that you are already working with that group to get that on calendars, because I know even at the
Madam Chair, I can't hear
I think
you
you
anymore.
muted yourself.
Oh, sorry about that.
Okay.
Not sure how that happened. I must have
No
bumped into
problem.
yeah, I was just going to say thanks for reaching out to the group of leadership to get that on calendars for me, because I know their calendars are busy too.
Yes.
And by the way, so you did mention, Rebecca, that commissioner level folks are welcome. Would you be CCing us on the appointment in case it does work on our calendars, or if we want to try to make
I
it part of it?
wasn't planning to, but I can absolutely do that. I was, hoping that there would be briefings inside of your agency, but I can definitely CC you on all the communications as soon as we have set dates. I can send you calendar invitations as well.
I think that would be great. I know I'd like to at least listen into any part of that discussion that I could make. So thank you.
No problem. No problem. Thank you. Yes, thank you for your interest in that, participating.
Great. And Commissioner Kessler, you noted you had raised your hand. It wasn't until you started talking that suddenly it appeared on my screen. So I'm not sure what's going on with that. But if anybody else has their hand up and I am just not seeing you, please, again, just jump in. Okay, not seeing or hearing anything.
I'm also looking at the list. I don't see any hands up.
Great. Okay. Well, thank you again, Rebecca. Thanks for all your work on this, and we look forward to the continued discussions on this.
Thank you very much.
All right. Okay, and I realized when Director Neuschler flipped to Rebecca's slides that she needed to flip over kind of our general friendly reminders about public comment procedures and guidelines. That normally comes before anything else, and I skipped right over that today. So I'm going to skip back because the next item on our agenda is the public comment period. So if you can all see the slide up on the screen, Director Neuschler, do you want to go through that a little bit?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. So we always welcome public comment and make sure to make space for public comment in our agenda. And so at this point, agenda item 5, this is the opportunity for public comment. And for anyone who's joining us from the public, if you want to bring up a topic for future discussion or comment on the item we just heard or anything else, this is your time. If you plan to comment, please read the procedures and the guidelines that are in short form on this slide or on page 2 of the meeting packet. If you are online, which I think everybody is, please use the hand raise feature in WebEx to indicate that you'd like to make a comment, and we will compile that list. You could also use the chat feature to request to make a comment. And then keep your hand raised until you have made your comment and make sure we can accommodate everybody and keep our list. I believe Denise will be queuing commenters as we go through this piece and let you know when it is your time to comment. And then if you have any technical difficulties, you can call us at 651-757-2877 or email info.eqb@state.mn.us, and we will do our best to help you out. So that is our public comment. I will note also that after the public comment period, we will move to the open discussion, the continuous improvement item, which will have more open discussion for the board members. And we want to really facilitate good discussion when we get to that point. But we'll start with public comment if we have anyone.
Thank you, Director Neuschler. Yeah, and I was just going to add a little bit more about that. Normally, the public comment is at the very end, but much like last month, we are going to have that now so that we can have more of that open, facilitated discussion among board members on the continuous improvement project. So we're going to have comments that will be on that throughout our online dialogue. Oh, sorry about the background noise. Got a severe weather drill.
Madam Chair, this is Denise Wilson. We don't have anyone with their hands up right now.
Okay.
So if anyone would like to speak, please raise your hand.
Thank you. All right. So I don't know if you can hear me through these announcements, but that are going on in the background about severe weather drills. But we will go ahead and move on. Do one more call out for public comment.
Madam Chair, there are no hands raised.
All right, thank you for that. All right, well, why don't we go ahead and move on then to the continuous improvement update. And again, I'm sorry if you hear background noise, my voice here, but in the same way we had the open dialogue on this topic during the March meeting, we're going to invite our MAD consultants to facilitate this portion of the agenda. So no decisions are going to be made here today. We're going to benefit from this open dialogue on the subject, and having our consultants facilitate is the easiest way to share ideas and help us reach the best outcomes so we can chat among one another without referring back to me. So you don't need to refer back to me. It'll be a facilitated discussion by our MAD facilitators. And that is our consultants, Karen and Nada, and they're going to take the lead on managing the open conversation. So first, Kayla Walsh will provide some background information and remind us of where we are in the process. So Kayla, are you ready to take it from here?
Absolutely. Thank you, Chair, and good afternoon, members and members of the public. My name is Kayla Walsh, and I am the Environmental Review Program Administrator for EQB. I'm happy to be with you all today to present this overview of the continuous improvement effort. I will start off with some level-setting information, and then Nada will present our engagement findings. And after that, Karen will describe the draft decision matrix and lead the board in discussion. So we are introducing several new ideas today, which is why we prepared the discussion guide for your reference. So the link to that guide can be found on the same webpage as the board packet, but we will also drop a link to that guide in the chat here shortly, so you can access it for this portion of today's meeting. Next slide, please. This is just describing the purpose of today's meeting, to share ideas, not to make decisions, as the chair mentioned. You can go to the next slide. Thank you. So as you know, the Environmental Review Program in Minnesota has started 50 years ago. And so we want to make sure it continues to serve the environment and the people in Minnesota for the next 50 years. So we're currently working until June 2023 to build this continuous improvement process. So the next few slides will pertain to our methodology and how we're building this out. Next slide. We've opted for the continuous improvement approach so that we can be more proactive and systematic in making any changes. We're building out a new way of decision making that prioritizes what's most impactful, what's meeting our objectives in rule, what's aligning with our strategic plan, and what's serving the people who are involved in environmental review. This part of the work that we're diving into today is really about framing up that process that ultimately supports continuous evolution and optimization of our program. The final result will be a standardized, agreed upon way to prioritize changes to the environmental review program. Next slide. So in building this so far, we have considered feedback and past recommendations to accomplish the following. First, to identify what is going well and what improvements we might need. And those improvements could be as small as updating guidance or as large as policymaking or rulemaking. Second, we want to think about what components are to an effective program. So as we talked about at the last meeting, the board has the authority to monitor program effectiveness and enact any policies toward achieving a more effective program. And that's why we're spending a lot of time right now in developing that definition of effectiveness together. So then we really want to hone in on those criteria that in combination all help to define program effectiveness. And the result will be a prioritized list of actions or improvements that the board can take to improve and maintain environmental review program effectiveness. Next slide. And multiple considerations from all of these sources have really gone into our draft criteria so far to describe that effective program. We're looking at objectives in rule, our strategic plan, other past research and past recommendations that have been made to EQB, as well as interviews with other states. And we're also considering input from our interagency team and these board discussions. And we're using what we've heard through our online platform, Engagement HQ, and a listening session. And Nada will discuss those engagement findings in more detail very soon. We are also asking tribes directly for their ideas and for their positions on any tribal or treaty-related ideas which did not come directly from the tribes themselves. Next slide, please. So at a previous board meeting, Nada reported the findings from the research phase that you see in the top bar. And today you'll hear a summary from her of the engagement that happened in the last few months. And that's all being collated with the board's comments and the interagency team's guidance to result in these two things: a list of improvements or recommended actions that we can consider, and then the values that people assign to effectiveness, which we're calling the criteria for an effective environmental review program. So an example of an improvement might be to update the EAW form to address climate. And an example criteria would be upholding the value of accountability or transparency. So those criteria make up the prioritization matrix that you'll see in the discussion guide, and we'll go over that in more detail later on in the presentation. Next slide, please. So those were all very high-level steps that we have taken to build the process, and now I'm going to pivot to talk about the actual outcome, the deliverable, which is the continuous improvement process itself. And this is a draft based on that feedback I mentioned that we have gotten so far. And I want to stress that you as board members will have future opportunities to influence and refine it through our conversations today and again before June 30th. Next slide, please. So with all of that input in mind, we drafted this continuous improvement process to have 6 steps, 3 on this slide and then 3 on the next slide. So today our focus is on that 3rd step that we called prioritize, which is the prioritization matrix. We're going to get into a detailed conversation about that later. And we want to work with all of you to refine that, fine tune it, and figure out what that prioritization matrix can look like. But first, I'll walk through the steps to give you a sense of the overall flow of the process. So the bar underneath is really meant to show that EQB will always passively be accepting ideas for improvements throughout the year. And this could be through Engagement HQ, phone calls, emails, and meetings, but we would keep a transparent list of those improvements. And then we have heard feedback that it would be helpful to do a more concerted effort to collect feedback or a push to collect feedback right before we begin the process. And this is not going to be a one and done run through. We would intend to run this annually. So we would begin the process. And then the way that this draft is set up is step 2 scoping would be really minimal. So if an idea pertains solely to a directive outside of EQB purview, it would not be evaluated. So for example, anything only about permits that we don't deal with or that we would never want to deal with, that would not go through the matrix. But ideas that could be in our jurisdiction, such as requiring environmental review of a new mandatory category, that would be in scope. So initiatives or improvements that pass this brief scoping exercise would then be run through the prioritization matrix to determine how many criteria of an effective program they meet. Next slide, please. So that would bring us to the fourth step. The matrix would help give us an order to the improvements based on how they contribute to program effectiveness. So for example, an improvement might meet all of our criteria, in which case we would then plan for its implementation. And that's step 5. So we would think really critically about what resource needs would be required to implement it, like time, staff, does it hinge on other things to happen first? Does it truly address the root cause of an issue? And then once staff vet that, staff would present all of this information to the board for the board's final decision on sequencing. So sequencing the improvements for implementation first, second, third, so on. Next slide. So the whole process, as it's currently drafted and designed, is to really equip you all with the best information to help inform decisions. So ideally, it would result in a prioritized list of actions that are very ready to implement, and it could be accomplished in a transparent and replicable way that really ideally translates to that implementation and informing our work plans yearly. So we definitely want to hear your feedback during the discussion today on this draft process and the draft criteria for effectiveness. And Karen will again highlight these 6 steps later on in the presentation and make space for those questions and that conversation. But before we really get into that, I would like to hand it over to Nada now to provide additional context for you all. She's going to talk a little bit more about her analysis of the engagement HQ data and the listening session data. So with that, it's my pleasure to hand it over to you, Nada. Welcome.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Mariam Nada. I go by my last name Nada, and I'm happy to share some of the preliminary findings from our engagement effort. Jesse, if you could go to next slide. So as part of this work, we conducted a few different engagement activities. One was a listening session, and then the other was online feedback through Engagement HQ that was open for several weeks over the last few months. Next slide. And just to kind of give you a little bit of background on what we did during the listening session, which was held on January 30th, we had 13 participants at the beginning. There were a few more people who joined, but then we also had online input that we received through Engagement HQ from January to March, and we received input from 124 unique participants. Next slide. We guided these discussions around these questions. We really wanted to understand from those who engage with the environmental review program what they think are characteristics of an effective environmental review program. So these 3 main questions were what we used to guide both the listening session as well as the Engagement HQ input. What are the characteristics of an effective environmental review program? What suggestions do people have for improving the effectiveness of the environmental review program? What is the environmental review program doing well or not doing well? What frustrations do folks have? And if you had a magic wand, what one thing would you do to improve the environmental review program? Next slide. So we have some information about who participated as of now for the listening session. As I mentioned earlier, because it was a smaller group, we were able to do a round robin and get introduction from folks. So we had environmental review technical professionals, for example, consultants who do environmental review. We also had environmental advocacy nonprofit or nonprofit representatives, and we had representatives of local and state government who perform environmental review. With Engagement HQ, we have some data that we're still parsing out, but there was a quick poll where folks could identify who they are. As you can see, majority of folks who participated or who visited the page said that they have not engaged with the program before or that they have signed or organized a petition. Less commonly, folks mentioned that they attended one or more public meetings or that they were technical practitioners involved in performing or authoring environmental review. Next slide. So we took all this input and we used some methods. Matt did some coding and categorizing some of these comments to identify themes. In this work, we took all the input and we applied multiple themes to comments that fit more than one theme. For example, some folks had comments that were pretty specific or had one idea. Some folks had comments that had multiple ideas. So where in those situations, we applied multiple themes to those comments. And what we found is that these input fits into two broad categories. As Kayla mentioned, some of the improvements, some high-level improvement topics, as well as broad work areas that EQB should work on to improve effectiveness of environmental review, or other comments that were more about values or criteria for an effective environmental review program. Next slide. At a high level, here are the improvement topics that most commonly came up in those themes. As you can see from this chart, a lot of mentions around cumulative impacts or full life cycle greenhouse gas emissions. As you go further down, we have public disclosure and engagement, comments around mandatory categories, and less commonly, alternatives analysis, environmental justice, human health impact, as well as mentions of responsible government units. Next slide. We had also one or two mention of these topics. There were a few comments that were around appeal process, environmental review and housing and development projects, streams and wetlands, water appropriation, and wind projects. In total, we had 20 improvement topics. And as I mentioned, again, some were very general or very specific, and then some were very specific recommendations around things. So there were multiple ideas within those comments. Next slide. Before I pass it on to Karen, any questions for me? And I believe Rebecca will be helping me out a little bit with hands.
We don't have any hands raised.
Yeah, I was unmuting to say that too.
Thank you. Well, I'll pass it on to Karen, who will talk a little bit more about the decision criteria or prioritize.
Thank you, Nada. Good afternoon, everybody. We are going to use the same format that we did at the last board meeting, where I'm going to present a handful of slides, and then we're going to set up the board discussion, where we're going to have a couple of more broad, open-ended questions, and then we are going to do the go-around or round-robin question. As Kayla mentioned with her remarks, there's a lot of new information today. We have presented this information to, for example, the Interagency Continuous Improvement Team and a few other audiences, and it has taken a lot for people to process what we're presenting. So when we get to the discussion, I expect that might be part of what we're talking about. So I'll go kind of slowly here, but keep in mind that we will have time to process this as a group. The focus today with the process that Kayla outlined is on the prioritization matrix. On the next slide, I will show you the steps. Kayla had them in her slides as a process with circles, but here we have them as a list. So how this works is the EQB will run the CI process annually, ensure that the improvements apply to EQB, use the prioritization matrix, which is what we're talking about today. Then there's more of the next steps. So it's ordering the prioritized list. Staff will look at implementation. So we've had a lot of questions about this. The prioritization criteria that we're going to be talking about today are not around effort or impact or feasibility. They are around, do they meet the criteria of environmental review effectiveness? And we'll talk more about that. And then finally, there's a pretty long list of improvements. So there is going to be more sequencing and alignment with board goals and other board priorities. On the next slide, I'm going to show you another visual. We're presenting this a few different ways to make sure that it resonates with people. There's the list of improvements that come out of the research work and the engagement work, as well as input from the continuous improvement team and the board. The improvements are going to go through criteria, go through a prioritization matrix. Right now, there's 12 criteria. Then the improvements are going to be prioritized, but with that second bullet point in the last shape, there is an aspect of the board looking at whatever your strategic direction, goals, or focus is for the year, or however you might define your year as a calendar year or a fiscal year. So if the board chooses to focus on, for example, engagement, just giving a random example, then some of those improvements may rise to the top a little bit more. Then on the next slide, we have a few more examples to build this out. So we talked about how improvements are project or work areas. MAD will provide a list of improvement topics and actual improvements from the analysis work that NADA has performed. With the prioritization criteria, I want you to keep in mind that the board input at the last meeting was critical for the foundation for this prioritization criteria. When you see the criteria in a couple of slides, you're probably going to recognize a lot of things that you said. Some of you talked about accountability. You talked about transparency, engagement. So a number of different items. And it's not just from the board meeting, it's also from the public input. It's from the continuous improvement interagency team. And then all that goes into the resulting prioritized improvements. Next slide. We put together this really simple prioritization matrix example. There's actually 12 criteria right now, so it's not a full list of criteria, but we found with some of the people that we talked to before the meeting that it was easier if you could visualize what this actually is instead of talking about it conceptually. There are the criteria going across the top. So these are the actual criteria that we'll be talking about. Accessibility, accountability, consistency, environmental protection, inclusivity. Then we put in a few made up examples because we didn't want it to be too reactionary if we had some actual examples that people feel strongly about. So an example of an improvement project you can see here is requiring an EAW for any development that it destroys more than 2 acres of designated unicorn habitat. So that's the level that the improvement projects will be at. They're not categories or broad topics, they're a little bit more specific. Next slide, please. We understand that this is not very readable, but we just wanted to show you what's in your board discussion guide, that there are 12 criteria with associated draft definitions. Next slide. On the next 3 slides, we just put the 12 criteria so you can see in a little more detail what they are. And I'll just run through them because we are going to be talking about them. I'm not going to read the definitions, but we have accessibility, accountability, consistency, environmental protection. Next slide. Inclusivity, also environmental justice focused. So that's an important point there. Then there's measurable, programmatic integrity, quality assurance. Scientific integrity supports public engagement, transparency, and understandable. With these criteria, we are working with the interagency team on the wordsmithing. And then at the next meeting, we will bring the wordsmithing to the board. So you all don't have to get involved in the wordsmithing of the definitions, but that is an activity that we're working on with the agency representatives. The next slide brings us to our board discussion. I'll set it up with a couple of slides. So next slide, please. As I believe the chair said, and Kayla mentioned also, that we are not making decisions today based on this information. Work is going to continue on finalizing the criteria at the May board meeting. And this is just input for refining the prioritization criteria. Next slide. Before we get into our discussion, I wanted to let you know where we're going at the next 2 meetings before we wrap up the project. The prioritization discussions and work, it's a 2-part process. It's the April board meeting and the May board meeting. At the May board meeting, we will be working with you on refining and finalizing the prioritization matrix, reviewing the criteria definitions that I mentioned. There's going to be some testing of the matrix with some real and made up project examples. And then we want to confirm that the design of the matrix meets the need of everything that you will need to rate, that the board will need to rate. In the June meeting, we hope to delve into some actual improvement projects. And I think I just want to show you one thing before we get into the discussion. If you could please go back to slide 26. It's the one with the prioritization matrix example. It's that chart. You have the board discussion guide, which explains this a little bit better, but I just wanted to explain the assumptions behind the prioritization matrix. It is a yes, no, or an on-off with how it's designed right now. So either the criteria is met. If it is met, then it receives an X. And if it is not met, then it's blank. That's the assumption that we're going into the discussion based on today. And that can always change. Like you might have other ideas or opinions about that. But right now, the prioritization matrix is set up as a yes, no. That's the design of the matrix. And Jesse, if you can go back to slide 34, which is the facilitated conversation on prioritization criteria. So one more. go to the, and then one more beyond that. Great. As I mentioned, we're going to have a couple of broad questions and then one go around question. As the chair mentioned, what's in red here, you can offer input without referring back to the chair for guidance. At our last meeting, we tried to do away with titles, but we noticed that it is natural to often call a commissioner, commissioner, and then his or her last name. So feel free to use titles. It seems to be part of your culture here. So don't feel like you have to forego using titles, but you don't need to refer back to the chair for guidance during the discussion. Next slide. So these are the discussion questions that we're going to be going through. The first one's just what questions do you have about the draft criteria? The second one is, do these draft criteria cover the important components of how environmental review work gets done, and also what environmental review covers? If not, what's missing? And then number 3, it's really a balance question. Do these criteria cover all the aspects of effectiveness that you care about while still being easy to use? Is it a good balance with this prioritization matrix? Are there too many or too few criteria? Next slide. With that, I will open it up to the board members. Please raise your hand using the hand raise function in WebEx if you're able to. And Rebecca's going to help us keep track of or stack the people who have their hands up. But we'd love to hear your questions and your reactions to what we've presented so far.
Karen, I have Commissioner Daubenberger with her hand up, and then next, Nicholas Martin.
Great. Go ahead,
Thanks.
Commissioner.
Thanks, Karen, for getting this kicked off. And I just wanted to mention, even though you have a lot of this on the slides, but there's a link in the chat, and that's to the discussion guide. So if folks want to refer to that as well, that discussion guide, there's a nice link in the chat, and I just checked the link and it works. So thanks. That's all I wanted to jump in with at this point.
Thank you. Nicholas Martin.
His hand is down. I'm not sure if that was maybe a fluke. I don't see his hand up again anymore. I mean.
Oh, sorry. I put it down as I started to speak, but I had myself muted, so you didn't know that I was trying to speak. Sorry. So thanks for all your work here. I had I sort of 3 questions in my mind about the draft criteria, and the first one really is just like for number 1, for what questions, I don't have a firm thought here, but it seems to me that 12 is a lot of criteria for people who are actually trying to apply these. So I wonder if there might not be some potential for seeing if there's some overlap, like if I were trying to answer these, like I might think, is this criterion, what's the difference between measurable and the scientific integrity one, or what's the difference between public engagement and the transparency one? I'm not sure. Maybe it's just the right number, but just a thought that, it could make the use of these criteria easier later on if there are some that can be combined into a smaller number overall. So that's just a reflection. I'm not sure. The second thing that I wanted to raise is we often have this debate, I think, about whether our regulatory environment is kind of business friendly in Minnesota. And I think it, I'm not saying it's not, I think it is pretty business friendly, but often in the environmental review discussion that turns on, is the guidance predictable and specific enough? And, do the project proposers know what's being asked of them, and are the things being asked of them, do they impose a reasonable amount of time burden and stuff like that? And I didn't really see that jumping out of the criteria. I think there are elements of it in several of the criteria, like maybe the accountability one, or the understandable, or consistent. Like those are all like elements of what I think makes a process more predictable for the people who are wanting to do projects. But I just wonder whether there should be some criteria that is specific to that. Sort of like, does this improvement make the process more, I don't know exactly what words to use, I haven't formulated it, but more predictable, more quicker for businesses, while not sacrificing any of the other, any of the environmental impacts or any of the other public transparency or something. I'm not suggesting that concerns of businesses should be put above any of the other criteria, but just should there be a criterion specific to that? So again, it's more of a question than a like a specific thing I want to see, but a question to raise.
Anything else?
I had a third one, but it's more about the matrix and the thing about tribal consultation afterwards. And I'm not sure if that's the time to bring this up, or if you're going to get to that separately.
I think that's a good question. We might need EQB staff to jump in to answer that. But yes, that's a really good question that others have asked.
Okay, well, my thought on that is only this, that the matrix presents these 12 criteria, and then it has what looks like kind of a footnote about tribal consultation. And and I'm not sure, part of me feels like that is appropriate, because as sovereign nations, tribes need to be consulted with through separate formal processes, and shouldn't be thought of as just another environmental stakeholder. That should be a separate process. On the other hand, it does look a little bit like a footnote, like, we look at all these other things, and then, oh, did we remember to check on how this affects tribes? So I'm not actually sure which, I could see it cutting both ways, and I'm not sure which of those is a better approach. But there are folks who have much more expertise on tribal consultation than I do. So I just want to flag that as something that should be careful about.
And we have Joseph Bauer Kemper, then Alice Roberts Davis, Katrina Kessler, and then Mehmet Steenberg.
Okay, and I noticed Kayla Walsh from EQB turned on her camera. Kayla, were you going to address the tribal consultation comment?
Sure, Karen, I can take a try at that. I think that's a really important comment and an important conversation for the board to have. And we definitely did not intend for that to look like it was a footnote left over, but I completely understand and how that was set up in the guide, the discussion guide. So I think we want to acknowledge that EQB does not currently have a process for tribal relations, for tribal consultation or collaboration formally adopted. And so we definitely want to give precedence to tribes and tribal concerns, and work as appropriate with tribes and build those relationships, and definitely looking for feedback on how to incorporate that into this overall process and how we can do a better job at that. And it was important to us that it did not appear like we were putting them in the matrix as checking a box. Yes, we met a tribal need or not. So we want to be careful about how we incorporate that into the overall process. I don't know, I will extend the opportunity to our executive director, Catherine, to comment too, if you have anything to add, because I know that's important to you as well.
Thanks, Kayla. I think you explained that very well. I think Board Member Martin, what you were saying about recognizing the sovereign relationship and wanting to sort of prioritize that and keep it separate and not kind of run those things through the same process was really what we had in mind. And so that we can work to make sure the way it's presented is very clear about that. And I will note, because we did get some comments from the some of the tribal partners, that we have reached out and sent some information prior to this meeting about what was going to be discussed, and asked, basically invited them to make any respond back to Kayla or to myself, and we'd be happy to meet with them about this whole process as we go through.
Okay, thanks for addressing that, EQB staff. Rebecca, since you can see the sequence of who has their hand up, I'll turn it to you to just call on who's next.
Thank you, Karen. We have Joseph Bauer-Kemper next.
Yeah, thanks, y'all. Thanks, Nada and Karen, for your work on this. A couple of things come to mind that resonate or overlap in some ways with what Nick said in the follow-up there. Maybe first I'll just note that the consistency criteria, I don't know, Nick, if that resonates with some of what you're saying about predictability. I think of these criteria as rather meta. They're not the improvement ideas themselves, but they are the criteria by which improvement possibilities are going to be considered. And so, maybe that consistency being at the forefront there addresses some of what you have in mind. And also, as Member Martin, I guess, was saying about the number of criteria, I'm similarly thinking in some ways the other side of the coin. If there are criteria that overlap, then a project is kind of staged to get double points for maybe some of its, or an idea, an improvement idea is sort of queued up to get double points from the matrix when criteria may overlap. And so when we think about the number of criteria, that conversation and the decision of perhaps whittling down the number of criteria is going to have an impact on how ideas are rated by the matrix, significant impact. And that may be a good thing, but it's on my mind. And then sort of tied to that, Karen, when you mentioned that one of the assumptions is kind of a binary approach, like something is either a yes or a no. And we may have conversations about shifting that to more of a rating or something, making it a more three-dimensional matrix. Another contour of that might be the weighting of the criteria themselves. They could still be binary, but be weighted differently. And I know we've talked about this in previous conversations, but I just wanted to put that idea or that consideration out there. But in the same breath, I'll walk it back by saying, thinking about shifting from a binary model to a rating model, or thinking about shifting toward weighted criteria rather than equally rated criteria, those may be solutions looking for problems. I don't want to make this unnecessarily complicated until we find out that it needs to be more nuanced. But those are nevertheless things that I want to put out there. And then I too took note of the reference to, let me look back at the wording here, the tribal status and relationship. And I've certainly appreciated, Kayla, how you have been conceiving of the government to government relation aspect of things, the distinctiveness of those relationships, and how that needs to be considered with great care. I am wondering, this may be a premature question, but I'm nevertheless curious, right? If the tribal status and relationship contour, it's not a criteria, but it seems to be an articulated contour. Is there been any thought as to where in the 6-step continuous improvement process that is accounted for? So I don't know if that's a question for Kayla, but I'm curious, if we think about that broader 6-step improvement process, that we're in a particular slice of it now, does that tribal status and relationship consideration, is it mapped onto that broader process somewhere? Thanks.
Okay. I think that's a really good consideration to look at the broader process. And Kayla?
Thanks, Karen, and thank you, Member Bauer-Kemper, for that question. I personally would like to see it happen sooner in the process rather than later, and take precedent and really help inform the decisions that happen later on throughout that 6-step process, but I'm open to feedback. And I think this is a good place to have that conversation and how we as or how you all as a board would most like to see that happen. If you have ideas on where you might see a natural fit for that in that sequencing of steps.
What stands out for me is the purposefulness or the intentionality. So building it into the process. So that's very helpful feedback. Okay, thank you, Member Bauer-Camper. We will move on to the next person.
We have Katrina Kessler.
Did Commissioner Roberts Davis get her question answered? No, so Commissioner Roberts Davis is next then.
Her hand's not up
Oh,
anymore.
oh, okay.
No, yeah,
okay.
It was. I'm sorry. I took it down after you read my name earlier. Sorry.
Okay. Okay. All right.
My question is.
Jump. Oh, go ahead. Go ahead, Commissioner Roberts Davis. Go ahead.
Thank you. My question is a process one, and perhaps I missed it. I'm just wondering about the scoring system for the matrix. Is there guidance on what the right score is to move forward? Is it all 12? Is it 9? Is it as low as 6? Is there anything about that you can share?
At this point, there's not. So I think we actually have to run some projects through the matrix as tests, but it is what we've talked about so far in the design is that it's ranked. So it is purely just that there would be maybe one that scores 12 at the top and one that's at the bottom with 1 or 0. So it's just a ranking of all the projects with the current design. But we haven't had data or examples to say that from this section to this section means something. Maybe it would evolve into that, but not at this point. We don't have that clarity. Okay, any other questions?
So I think I'm next.
Yes.
So I don't know if I have an opinion as to if there are too many or too few. I mean, there's certainly a lot. And to build on what Board Member Martin said, and I think what Board Member Bauer-Kemper said, I think about and then I think, Karen, you said you got to run some ideas to figure out how this actually works. So you think about the ideas of, do we need, just throwing it out there, do we need thresholds for greenhouse gases as part of this? Like, this is a question that we are actively struggling with at the MPCA as we have projects coming through, and whether or not these criteria are the right criteria to evaluate that type of continuous improvement idea. And things like providing consistency, which I think Board Member Martin spoke to. Also providing environmental protection, super important for environmental review. And I do think one thing, well, kind of hand in hand, is it measurable is important, which is here. And then integrity. And I think integrity shows up twice: programmatic integrity, scientific integrity. I don't know if you need integrity 2 times. So I would be curious, as you run through some of the ideas that historically have been raised, and then some that I think are more at the top of the list for 2023 and going forward, recognizing the challenges that we are facing today, whether or not this number of criteria essentially get watered down because everybody gets each idea gets 6, but nobody gets 12. And if you lump some of these criteria together, if some of these ideas might rise to the top. So maybe it's an iterative exercise as you start to push the machine through, or the ideas through the machine, and then you say, okay, well, we're not seeing a clear delineation of what's at the top and what's not. So just thoughts to think about as you move forward.
Thank you for the input. Rebecca, do we have anybody else who's on deck?
Yes, we have. Oh, okay.
I think I might be next.
Yeah, I had Matt Conner-Steenberg next.
Thank you. Thank you for this information. It's a really interesting set of questions to think about. So I One of the things I just wanted to mention briefly, I went back and looked at the statute, 116D, from which all of our environmental review work stems. And the legislature identified three purposes there: one, to declare a state policy with respect to the environment, but then two sort of functional purposes for environmental review: to promote efforts that will prevent or eliminate damage to the environment, and then separately, it gets its own separate enumeration to enrich the understanding of the ecological systems and natural resources important to the state and the nation. And to me, environmental review has always had both of those objectives, and I think there's a subtle difference between them. I think the environmental protection value that the statute mentions, I think, comes through pretty loudly and clearly in the environmental protection criterion that we've got here. But I don't know that that other value, which is, to enrich the understanding of the ecological systems and natural resources, what I'll think of as sort of the basic science value, that environmental review is valuable both because it leads to better environmental outcomes, but it's also valuable because learning about our environment is intrinsically a good. That we don't know how the information we gather today might be useful to a legislator or other policymaker down the road, but simply the act of gathering that information is itself a good. And we know that because the statute says so. So it seems to me that one of the criteria here, or perhaps maybe a revision of maybe the environmental protection criteria, would embrace both of those facets, both that the information is going towards environmental protection, but separately that there's a consideration that it is information that enriches our understanding of ecological systems and natural resources. The reason I mention this, and it seems like a quibble, but the reason I mention it is because when we were going through the process of revising the environmental assessment worksheet, one of the objections that was raised to revising the environmental assessment worksheet to account for climate change was framed in the following way: well, how much carbon will we save putting into the atmosphere by making this change? And to me, that wasn't the right question. The purpose of environmental review is to find out what's happening, which I think is that third legislative value stated in the statute. It is not always not simply, right? It's not always about even primarily tying it to an environmental protection value. So I think both of those are values identified by the legislature, and I hope there's a way that they can both be reflected in the criteria. Thank you for letting me go on at length about that.
Great insight. Thank you for offering that. For the rest of the board, we haven't heard on anything that's missing from the list of criteria. We just had a member who offered some input on something that could be tweaked or something that's missing, but is there anything else that stands out to you as something that's missing from the criteria or from the concept? As we mentioned, this is a new concept. Are we missing something here?
Karen, we have Nancy Dobenberger next.
Okay, thanks. Go ahead.
Thank you. And to that question specifically, Karen, what's missing? I don't necessarily see anything missing. And others have already brought up that it's got a lot of criteria. One thing that struck me in talking with others here at MnDOT is, maybe there is a way to bucket these a little bit so that we're not splitting hairs between a couple different things, or we're making it clear we're looking for a couple different aspects of, say, integrity, right? If that's the one where example of putting together integrity or scientific integrity and measurable, what parts of that would have in one bucket, sort of thing. Just so maybe if it's a fewer number of criteria, not quite as daunting, perhaps, but just the thought there. And then the kind of the checkbox system versus weighting. I think we talked about it a little bit, but yeah, if it's binary, it meets or it doesn't meet, right? Is there somewhere in between where partially meets or is rather neutral on this particular criteria? Yeah, aspect we want to consider here as well.
Thank you. And as another person brought up, another member brought up, there is the binary, there's the weighting, and you could call it a scale, like where it's a 0 to 3. But when in working with other clients, sometimes it is hard to define that. How do they get a 0? How do they get a 1? How do they get a 2? But if it's clear how the rating is assigned or the scale is assigned. So I just wanted to mention that there is a third choice of having a rating scale of some sort. So it could be weighting or it could be a rating scale as well. Rebecca, do we have more people with their hands up?
Yes, we have Ken Foster.
Go ahead.
Yeah, hi. Yeah, I appreciate this a lot. This is really a good list. And I won't say too much, just want to affirm a lot of what has been said, that there's a lot of criteria. And the way I think about it is that we start out with all these criteria and then test it out, as has been said. But I do want to pick up on what Commissioner Kessler said, just to reinforce that. I think it'll be really important to choose a discrete set of potential improvements that are going to test various types of improvements. You know, as she said, some that are new that, you know, are really cutting edge and some that are older, but then other types, and I don't really know how to define the different types. And I think over the next month or two, as we do that, that'll make it clearer, because the utility of this, right, is still all unclear. I mean, I think it's going to be really useful, but right now we have a large list and we're going to come up with a yes or no on each of them. And it may be that that's going to give us, what we're trying to do is get information for us to try to make decisions. And that's going to give us new information. So I think that, you know, keeping it simple now, keeping it with many, but then very carefully testing it against different improvements in the coming month or two will be important. And then even beyond that too. So setting out that we're going to have a certain date and time where we're going to revisit the list of criteria and see, because I would be wary of lumping any together now, because we're certain that we're going to lose something if we do that. And then I just want to say, Mehmet's, you know, comment, as I hadn't thought of that. It's very interesting. And that's be useful to think about further. I wouldn't say to put that, you know, into the environmental protection criteria. I think that one's good as it is, but this idea of, does it provide information, you know, that's going to enrich our understanding? That's interesting to, I think, kind of keep out there for discussion.
Thank you for your input, Member Foster. You all are giving us great input and great advice on how to structure some of the next steps, like testing with a set of potential improvements that are of different types, new or historical. That's really helpful. Oh, who else has comments? Rebecca?
I don't have any more hands, so please, if people would like to, they can raise their hand.
Okay, then why don't we go on to the next question, which is the next slide for whoever's doing the slide deck. And we wanted to do the go around question just to make sure that everybody has a chance to give input. So this is a little repetitive, but as it says at the bottom of the slide, feel free to comment on question 2 also, or anything else that you didn't have a chance to comment on, or that another member's input triggered for you if there's another comment that you have. But I'll just read the question that we have. This is the balance question, which some of you have addressed. So do these criteria cover all the aspects of effectiveness that you care about while still being easy to use? So we have definitely received feedback on this, but why don't we just go around? I'll do the same thing that I did last time, where I'll call on members in alphabetical order by last name and give you an opportunity to give any final input or thoughts. So the first person I have on the list, I'm not sure if she's in the meeting right now. It is Commissioner Arnold.
Hi, I'm back.
Oh, you are. Great. Thanks for coming back.
Yep. My apologies for having to jump off for a little bit. I think some of the criteria could probably be lumped together and simplified a little bit. So if you think about accessibility and supporting public engagement and understandable, you could have that all in a kind of lumped thing that is something about, you know, an ability to engage with the public, which, you know, if you're doing it well, should also be accessible and understandable and, you know, has some features about it that are kind of bundled under. So I would say, you know, the list is, and I missed some of the discussion earlier. I'd say there are probably a few too many criteria, but that I think some of the criteria are easily lumped together.
Karen, I think you're on mute.
That always happens, doesn't it? Member Bakken is up next.
So as I have the luxury of taking notes during all this discussion, I found the first thing that you had said was processing what you are presenting. I guess for me, that's what's happening here for me, since I'm new to all of this. But the things that I have written down were simple, reasonable, consistent, and functional. And as Commissioner Kessler pointed out, the word integrity gets brought up quite a bit. But I think those 4 things of simple, reasonable, consistent, and functional all pertain to its integrity. And I guess I would agree as well with Commissioner Doppenberger on narrowing down the criteria. I appreciate Mehmet's comments, as it seems that he's more well-versed than I am by far, to give good participation and good input. I appreciate his comments. And then the one thing that Ken Foster said, that our utility is unclear yet. So as we are making improvements, we're kind of in uncharted waters, but I think to make it so it's not so cumbersome, to narrow up that criteria or be able to put some of those in accompanying buckets. So those are my thoughts. Thank you.
Thank you. Member Bauer Kemper.
Hi, thanks. So regarding this go-around question, I suppose I found a member Conor Steenberg's observations pretty compelling. So, you know, when asked, do these criteria cover all of the aspects of effectiveness that you care about while also still being easy to use? I suppose the answer at this point might be no, in the sense that as I look through the criteria, at least here in the moment, they might not cover that that value of understanding ecosystems that's there in the statute. And then, are they going to be easy to use? That also might be no, in the sense that we may have too many. And then even as we decide to collapse the list or combine some things, like I said, we really are changing the math. Because right now, if you use a matrix and a proposed improvement is understandable and transparent and accessible and has community engagement, well, there's 4 points. And if we combine those together, you know, that's 1 point. So I know that's not terribly helpful, but I suppose I want to join most folks in having fewer criteria, and I also want to add criteria, don't I? My apologies for not being able to provide much traction there. Thanks.
Thank you for your input. Commissioner Dobbenberger.
Thank you. And, I guess I kind of jumped the gun and already expressed my opinion a little bit on the too many or too few criteria, thinking, yeah, they could be combined a little bit. But Bauer Camper just brought up a interesting point about the weighting that I was thinking about as well. And, and I think maybe in general, someone brought this up earlier too, before we do too much changing or get into something like weighting. Um, and we could try that out, but having this criteria out there, using it, try it on as some examples, we might want to tweak it after we run through some examples, or even have it evolve after we have it in play for a little while. So um, I think at this point, it seems to cover all the aspects of effectiveness that I would care about. Ease of use, of course, as a project proposer, and that would be as important to me too. And I think as long as we're clear on what we're looking for with these, that would be useful and helpful. Thanks.
Thank you. And something that Commissioner Dobbenberger said reminded me, when we do these go-around questions, you can feel free to pass also. If you're still processing, or if you've already said your piece and given your input, you can always just say that you've already commented. So feel free to pass if you don't have another comment. Our next person is Member Foster.
Thank you. I was looking at this, one new comment is that, it seems like supports public engagement and environmental protection. Those two criteria are a little bit different than the others in that they get to the heart of what the EQB is about and what environmental review is about. So I don't know what to do about that or if that's even true, but it just strikes me that an improvement that is, measurable, or increases consistency seems in some way at a lower order than, one that helps us do a better job getting information to protect the environment. They seem different, and because the protect environment and supports public engagement is really at the heart of what we're supposed to be doing. So that was kind of the one new thought that I had in looking at these, and that gets to weighting potentially. But yeah, so I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Thank you. Assistant Commissioner Dan Huff. Okay, I'm not hearing a response from Dan. I'll move to our new member, Daniel Katzenberger.
My space bar wasn't working. So yeah, so I am the new member, and I've not been part of these conversations earlier, so I'm a little bit reluctant to offer too much because I may not be in sync with the intent. I did take some notes, and I will offer these out there and take them or leave them because they may or may not be applicable. So one of the criteria is measurable, and I just wonder, and there's also a criteria for environmental protection, and I understand that, but is it measurable versus is it impactful, right? Or another way to say that, even is it necessary, right? I can see I can just envision a lot of things that could score 12s on this criteria that may not be impactful, that may not be necessary. And I could even probably figure out a way to put something through this process and have it have negative environmental or negative impact. Like you could craft it in such a way that you could get through these criteria in a way that isn't necessarily in the direction we want to go. The question of subjective criteria versus objective criteria. So these are written in a way that seems objective, but I could also see some subjectivity. And especially if you start getting into weighting, how do you weight something that could be subjective versus objective? And then the other thing, we talked about kind of the tribal nations, we talked about their stakeholders engagement involved, but what is the impact of any changes made on any stakeholders, whether it's tribal stakeholders, whether As Member Martin mentioned, whether it's businesses, from the agency commissioner standpoint, how does it affect their agency? Is it going to increase the burden on their agency to meet these criteria or to track these criteria and all of that? So I think there's just, how do we measure the impact of anything we're proposing or this process proposes and prioritizes on various stakeholders in this conversation? So again, I'm new, and that was probably more than I should have said, but that's what I have for now. So thank you.
Well, thank you very much for that feedback. One piece of the design that you noticed is that some of the implementation pieces are somewhat disconnected from the prioritization around improvements that support an effective environmental review program. But the necessary piece and to some extent the impact piece is a little bit disconnected from how this matrix is designed. So that's something to definitely consider. So I appreciate your input on that as this evolves. We have Commissioner Kessler, and so, yep, we'll just go. Commissioner Kessler's next.
Yeah, and I don't know that I have anything else to add, so thanks making that an option.
Okay, definitely. And we have Member Koner Steenberg.
I think I also have said enough. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. Member Martin.
Thanks. A lot of folks have talked about, maybe combining criteria and getting to a smaller number. I think I originally, wondered whether that was possible. I do think, though, I take Joe's point about, combining too much and then not being able to sort of like give appropriate weighting to something that is a good idea. So I think it could be, as someone else suggested, leave things as they are for now and test it out and see if it's not actually cumbersome to use with the number of criteria that are there. I think that could be a fine approach. One thought I had, if you did this sort of retroactively, like if you asked the EQB staff, what are like some improvements to the process that like everybody now, that we already made 5 years ago or something, and everybody now agrees were a great idea. I bet Denise could give several of those, and then run it through the matrix. And like if the matrix says that we wouldn't have done that thing, then maybe we have, we have to think about. And maybe you could even run it through, the one with 12 criteria versus one with the smaller number of criteria and see if the effect is different. I'm not trying to suggest like, an extra exercise or something that's, overly hypothetical, but that might be a useful kind of mental exercise.
I think we were already thinking along those lines. I believe
okay.
Denise looked at some climate criteria that's already, passed or went through. And we were thinking of it. It's a really good point to test it out and say this, retroactively. So all these different lenses that the members are suggesting, ways to look at this for the testing. Yes, that sounds really good.
And then the only other thing I was going to say, I had said this idea of like having an explicitly like business friendly criterion. And, I agree, like a lot of it's already in there. But if putting that as an explicit criterion would help sort of be able to, sort of anticipate criticisms from the business community that like we're not thinking about that as a criteria for improvements. I think that's still worth considering, right? Like maybe it doesn't mean we're doing anything different than what we would have done if we made it consistency and accountability and stuff, but just having, I'm not sure that business friendly is the right phrase. That might be too simplistic, but like something that's pointing to, we're thinking about that too. So.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Acting Commissioner McKinnon.
Yeah, thank you, and appreciate all the points that have been made previously. I won't take too long to reiterate just a couple of things that are really important from my perspective. Number one, the ease of use, clear direction, clear expectations of proposers and users with instructions, etc., that hopefully set up somewhat of a predictable process that is clear. I know there's timeline questions and trying to provide as much certainty as possible on things. I think just being clear and managing expectations through the whole process would be one of the main things that I would ensure that you focus on. Simply because, as we mentioned, or as Member Martin mentioned, the users of this and some of the things that they're going to be expected to do should be laid out and clear, and there should be no misinterpretation of that. So appreciate the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Commissioner Roberts Davis.
Thank you. I don't think I have any original ideas to add. Thanks for the opportunity.
Thank you. And Assistant Commissioner Huff, a coworker just told me that you were back in the meeting, so I'll call on you in a minute. I'll just give you a heads up. And then we have a proxy for Commissioner Peterson, Steve Roos. Do you have any comments from Department of Ag?
Since I'm part of the continuous improvement team, it's kind of challenging to weigh in with my own ideas and what's going on here. One of the things that occurs to me, though, that hasn't been addressed in either venue is what would the process be for ongoing application of these criteria? In other words, is this an exercise that the board would face on an annual basis? Take all 30 or 40 or 20 ideas that come in, and the board would have to wade through them? Or is this a process that's really meant for EQB staff or the continuous improvement team to go through on an annual basis and then elevate the top ones to the board for consideration? It would seem to me that ultimately the board will be the body that actually determines what and how many ideas get explored.
So it's the latter. So it is meant for the folks who do this as a full-time job, the EQB staff and the continuous improvement team members. They would be putting the projects through the matrix, and then it would go to the results would go to the board for consideration. But it's not for the board themselves to do the matrix rating and the detailed work. It's more for the EQB staff, as I understand it, and if needed appropriate, the continuous improvement partners from other agencies. But there is a piece that there's a lot of nuances here, as I presented in some of the slides, that is married or combined with board priorities. If the board has goals or initiatives, then if there's a group of projects, then the board can shape and form next steps around strategic priorities. But the nuts and bolts would be done by staff. So I know that this is, as a few of you have been asking about this, and it's a little bit confusing, but if anyone else has questions about that, let me know. But that's the basic concept. Dan Huff, Assistant Commissioner Huff, are you able to give any input?
Thank you, and I apologize. I had to jump off for a moment there.
Sure.
I don't have anything else additional to add except that a thank you for the team. I know a number of folks from the different agencies have been working on this, and I want to thank all of them, including staff at the EQB, for working on this, and I appreciate the facilitation from MAD. So thank you.
Thank you. Did I miss anybody in going through the list? Any final input or questions about the matrix or the discussion items? Well, thank you for all of your comments. We, of course, have note takers who have been writing down your suggestions and your input, and we will work together with the EQB staff and the Interagency Continuous Improvement Team to continue to form and shape this continuous improvement project. Chair Daubenberger, I'll turn it back to you to wrap up the meeting.
Very good. Well, I really appreciate that discussion. So thank you, Nada, for your presentation, and to Karen, excuse me, for leading us through that part of the meeting to talk through the criteria and get input. And for any of the public, members of the public who were able to continue to join us for that part, as I was mentioning at the beginning of the public comment period, there are other means for input. And in fact, certainly at next month's meeting, when we have the public comment period, you are more than welcome to comment on anything you heard here today in the meeting as well. So with that, we will return to the Roberts Rules of Order to close out the meeting at this point. And we have reached the end of the agenda. So is there a motion to adjourn?
Chair Daubenberger, I'll make that motion.
Thank you. I think that was Commissioner Kessler.
And I'll second it.
Thank you, Commissioner Arnold. All those in favor, say aye.
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 Any opposed, say nay. Hearing no opposition, the motion carries and the meeting is adjourned. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.